It was October 6, 1973. Across Israel, families gathered for Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Streets were silent. Radios were off. Soldiers were on leave, and synagogues were full. But as prayers rose to the heavens, war came crashing down. At 2 in the afternoon, the armies of Egypt and Syria launched a coordinated surprise assault. Over 180,000 Egyptian troops stormed across the Suez Canal, supported by Soviet-supplied tanks and artillery. To the north, Syrian divisions poured into the Golan Heights. Within hours, Israel's defenses cracked. Soldiers who had believed they were untouchable were suddenly outnumbered, outgunned, and overwhelmed. By nightfall, Israeli generals were reporting the unthinkable. Ammunition was running dangerously low. Anti-aircraft missiles were shredding Israeli jets. Egyptian and Syrian forces were advancing deeper by the hour. In Tel Aviv, Prime Minister Golda Meir convened an emergency war cabinet. The fear in her voice was unmistakable when she whispered, "If help does not come, we may not survive this." As Israel fought for its life, Meir authorized a desperate appeal to its closest ally, the United States of America. But Washington was divided. Inside the White House, President Richard Nixon and his Secretary of State Henry Kissinger debated furiously. Kissinger, ever the strategist, cautioned restraint. He believed that if the U.S. openly supported Israel, Arab oil producers would retaliate by cutting off the West's energy supply. Nixon, however, saw something else: a small democracy about to be crushed and America's credibility on the line. At one point, Nixon is said to have slammed his fist on the table and declared, "Send everything that can fly. We are not going to let Israel go down." It was a decision that would change the course of the war and the world. The operation was given a name, Nickelgrass. It would be one of the largest and fastest military resupply efforts in history. But it had to be done in secret. The U.S. could not afford the world to know just how much aid it was funneling to Israel. To Arab nations, the United States wanted to appear neutral. But in reality, Nixon had decided to bet the survival of Israel on American cargo planes. The mission began quietly. In the dead of night, C-141 Starlifter and the massive C-5 Galaxy aircraft, some of the largest planes in the world, began loading weapons, tanks, spare parts, and ammunition. Pilots were given strict instructions: no press, no photos, no details. Many of them didn't even know their final destination until they were in the air. From U.S. air bases in Delaware, New Jersey, and Germany, the planes lifted into the skies. Their cargo bays were packed to the roof. Artillery shells, ammunition for tanks and rifles, spare parts for Phantom F-4 fighter jets, and even entire tanks strapped down like oversized luggage. It was a lifeline disguised as logistics. For the next 32 days, a quiet but relentless air bridge carried supplies from America to Israel. The numbers were staggering. 567 flights were conducted. Over 22,000 tons of military supplies delivered. Some flights were so heavy that they broke landing gear upon arrival. To keep up appearances, U.S. officials downplayed the operation, insisting it was just standard support. But in truth, this was nothing less than the rebuilding of Israel's shattered army. On the ground in Israel, the effect was electric. Soldiers who had been down to their last few shells suddenly found crates of fresh ammunition waiting. Mechanics who had cannibalized broken jets for spare parts now had entire shipments of American replacements. Tank crews who had faced Syrian armor alone suddenly found new M60 tanks rolling onto the battlefield. The message was clear: you are not alone. By mid-October, Israel began to push back. In the north, Israeli forces regrouped and drove Syrian troops out of the Golan Heights, pushing them back toward Damascus. In the south, Israeli divisions launched a daring counterattack across the Suez Canal, cutting off Egyptian forces and surrounding the Third Army. The shift was dramatic. Arab commanders who had been confident of victory now watched in disbelief as Israel regained the upper hand. And behind the scenes, the quiet flow of American cargo was the invisible hand tipping the scales. Israeli pilots later admitted that without the resupply of jet parts and missiles, their air force might have been grounded. Tank crews confessed that their armored brigades would have collapsed without American ammunition. The lifeline of Nickelgrass had not just supplied Israel, it had saved Israel. But secrets rarely stay buried. By late October, Arab nations realized the scale of U.S. involvement. Their response was swift and devastating: the oil embargo. Led by Saudi Arabia, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, cut oil shipments to the United States and other nations supporting Israel. The consequences rippled across the globe. Gas prices in America quadrupled. Long lines formed at gas stations. Families waited hours for a few gallons of fuel. The world economy was thrown into chaos. For many Americans, the Yom Kippur War seemed distant, but its shadow had reached their driveways and dinner tables. And yet, Nixon never regretted his decision. To him, the survival of Israel had been worth the price. Even after the war ended, much of Operation Nickel Grass remained cloaked in silence. Official reports downplayed its scale. The U.S. and Israel avoided boasting about it, wary of inflaming Arab anger. But for those who lived it, the truth was unforgettable. Israeli generals privately admitted that without America's lifeline, their nation might not have survived. Soldiers told stories of watching massive U.S. cargo planes landing in the middle of the night, their cargo bays opening to reveal hope itself. To Israel, it was not just an airlift. It was a rescue. To the Arab world, it was proof that America would always tip the scales for Israel. To the United States, it was a gamble, one that reshaped global politics and ignited the oil crisis. Today, the story of Operation Nickel Grass remains overshadowed by the war itself and by the oil shock that followed. Many history books reduce it to a footnote. But in the eyes of those who fought on the front lines, it was more than just logistics. It was the reason they lived to see another sunrise. When asked years later about the operation, one Israeli officer simply said, "When we thought we were alone, the Americans came. They didn't send promises. They sent planes." And so, in the quiet hum of giant aircraft engines, in the secret cargo bays filled with weapons of survival, in the decision made in a White House room under crushing pressure, a hidden chapter of history was written. Operation Nickel Grass was not just a mission. It was a secret bridge of survival. A hidden story of how a nation on the brink of destruction was pulled back from the edge by planes that flew in the night, carrying a lifeline no one dared admit aloud.